To the Development Control and Regulatory Board, this day, the 11th of July 2019. Might I remind everyone present that the meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council website and will also be available for viewing on the County Council website after the meeting. Please turn your microphones on when you are speaking and off when you are finished speaking. Thank you very much. Membership of the committee today, Mr. Bolter is substituting for Mr. Crooks at this meeting. If we go on to the main agenda then, the first item is minutes of the previous meeting held on the 13th of June 2019. If there's no questions on that, if someone would like to move it, or all in favour of that? Thank you. Item number 2 is question time. We have no questions. Item 3 is questions asked by members under standing orders. We haven't ever any of those either. Item 4, to advise of any other item the chairman has decided to take. Well, I haven't got any. Item 5 is declaration of interest. Anyone wish to declare any interest? If just let that, it is noted that all members who are members of the Parish, Town, District Council or Liaison Committee will personally have an interest in those applications which relate to areas covered by those authorities. Are there any further declarations? Bill?
Yes, Chairman. I asked to speak this afternoon on item number 9 as a local resident. That was granted. Then yesterday afternoon I was asked to substitute on the board. So for clarity, I shall speak as a resident for item number 9 with your permission. Then I shall leave the chamber during the debate of that. Okay, all right.
Any further declarations? Nope. Item 6 then, presentation of petitions. We have received no petitions, I take it, Ewan?
No petitions.
No, okay. We move on to the main agenda then, the meat of the business for today. Agenda item 7, application for public path diversion order at Quenby Hall, Ungerton, Harborough District. That has been withdrawn, and it will be deferred to a meeting at a later date. After that, it's item number 8, which is application for definitive map modification order at Ashby Parva Road, Lear Lane, Dunton Bassett, Harborough District. I'd like to bring in Mr. Cross, and then and Ed will then go through the application. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. As I often say at the start of the committee that deals with rights-of-way matters, this committee illustrates the wide variety of work that you deal with. It's not just mineral planning and matters planning related, but you also have the important responsibility of dealing with rights-of-way matters, which obviously are very important and often can be very, very contested. Hence, the practice of this council is to bring reports like the 3 you did have on the agenda, now just to the board, so members can determine and debate the issues raised. It's a joint report in terms of this one in relation to Dunton Bassett, of the Chief Executive and Director of Environmental Transport. So what I will do is just briefly go through the law that applies with regard to this report. Then my colleagues here, Ed and Piers, will deal with the factual circumstances. So we're starting on page 53 with the summary of the report, and I'll start, if I may, on page 55 with regard to the background. And this relates to an application by the Dunton Bassett Parish Council for the definitive map that the County Council has a statutory responsibility to maintain, that lists all the definitive rights of way, to be updated by the inclusion of a footpath. Key thing perhaps to note in paragraph 8 is when the issue first arose, and that's in 2014, where a path that had been walked, and I'll come to a little bit later on in terms of length of time, was no longer able to be walked because of action taken by the landowner. So 2014 is the date that you need to keep in your minds, members, when you're looking at the 20-year rule that I'll refer to shortly. So the law with regard to this type of application is set out from paragraph 11 on page 55 onwards. And firstly, we give you the details of the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which deals with the County Council's responsibilities to maintain and keep up to date the definitive map. And on paragraph 13, page 56, the type of circumstances that enables the County Council to review the definitive map. And in this particular case, it's section 53.3, subsection C, little 1. We're looking at a right-of-way which is not shown on the map, but a statement subsists or reasonably alleged to subsist over land in the area to which the map relates, being a right-of-way to which this part applies. So that's what we're looking at with regard to this report. There are two tests then that you have to be satisfied are met in the circumstances, and our advice is that we should always look at test B, the lowest standard of proof. When we're looking at adding definitive maps, the law works in a way that protects both the applicant but also the landowner, and the Highways Act then comes into play, and that's set out in paragraph 17, section 31, and talks about the 20-year rule. And I mentioned earlier 2014, and the 20-year rule dates back or goes back from 2014. Top of page 57 highlights the provisions in the Highways Act that enable a landowner to take appropriate action to stop any rights over his or her land becoming rights of way. So, the report then goes through the evidence that officers under Ed's careful tendering and handling have considered with regard to whether this should be taken to the board and then beyond. So, just paraphrasing, because Ed will take you through it in more detail, we have the evidence, and that starts on page 58. We've looked at historical maps, the Ordnance Survey maps. Most importantly, the user evidence presented on behalf of the Parish Council from people who've walked the path. And then that's subdivided into asking people what route did they walk, the type of use and the status, why they were using the path, and when they were using it, anything they can tell us about the 20-year rule, how frequently use is, was any other users seen, were they tenants or employees, because if so, of the landowner, their views unfortunately don't count because there's a question about their objectivity, and was permission given? Because if anyone is giving you permission to walk over land, then there is not a deemed right of way. And then further details are given about certain individuals. We talk about whether or not was there any interruption, because obviously if the time period is stopped by the owner, then the clock, the 20 years, stops. Any actions by the landowners or agent to prevent use, such as putting padlocks or barbed wire, that's at paragraph 47. Paragraph 49 deals with any signs, your standard keep out or not, as the case may be. We then look at the characteristics of the path, and then summarise at paragraph 55 onwards the user evidence. We then look at the aerial photographs that are in the appendices, and then, making the report balanced, we then have the evidence that's been provided or been obtained in respect of what the landowner's position is. And that starts at paragraph 67 with details of the landowner's response and the landowner's CIMEX Limited. This process does take a bit of time, as members will appreciate having read the report, but there's a lot of stages of the process that have to be complied with to meet the statutory criteria, and one of which is the consultation that the County Council carried out, and that's dealt with under paragraph 78 onwards. An up-to-date site survey has been undertaken. That was in April 2018, and that's dealt with at paragraph 81 onwards. And then on page 66, the conclusion section summarises for you the issues that are germane and comes to the conclusion, having reviewed the application, the objections, and looked at the equality and human rights implications, that the recommendation is that this path should be added to the definitive map. I'll stop there, if I may, and hand over to Ed to give you a little bit more detail. Thank you, Chairman.
Ed, if you just continue then from...
Thank you, Anthony. This was an application coordinated by the Parish Council. And the route itself, if you have a look, can we just go back a slide? The route itself is between point A, middle top, there down to point B. And in fact, the whole area there was subject to minerals extractions over a number of years. And as the minerals extractions moved further and further west, that land became available for people to actually use. The evidence in support of the application is user evidence questionnaires that have actually been submitted, and these are statements given by people who claim to have used the path for specific periods of time, and also given us a bit of further information to say why and how they were using the paths as well. There are 16 forms. That's actually 20 different people because there were 4 couples included in that. And all the witnesses have identified the route as being the one shown A to B there. After I've stopped talking a little bit, I'll ask my colleague to actually go through the slides with you and actually describe the route on the ground, which I think will be much more meaningful to you as well. Anthony mentioned the 20-year rule. In basic terms, I stress in basic terms, what is being claimed here is that a public highway has come into being through the usage of the public using a line on the ground and actually believing they had the right to use that line on the ground. That needs to be shown to be happening for a period of at least 20 years, and those people doing that in terms of the fact that they feel they've got a right. If you look at Appendix, and I'm guessing here because it's not on this page, Appendix C, is it? The graph? User evidence graph. That's probably the most important thing in your pack, because that gives you the claimed usage by the various people who have submitted statements and for how long they have used the path. Now, clearly you'll note, as would be expected, not everyone has used the path for as long as everyone else. It depends on age, how long they've been in the community, etc. And you'll see some of the claims go a long way back and others are much shorter. But the majority of those claims are of 20 years. The users also being clear that they, and this is an important point because it's not always the situation on the ground for us. Sometimes we go out to see a route and it's not absolutely clear where that route is on the ground, but they say it's being very regularly used. They regularly see each other using it, and as regards permission, because obviously if you're given permission, you'll be being invited onto the land concerned and not feeling you had a right to walk backwards and forwards. Nearly everyone there has said they've not received permission, thought they had the right to do so. There are a couple of people, I believe, who wish to apply to allow to go on the route on horses, and there was discussion at some point with the landowner in respect to that and permissions given accordingly. Now, as regards the other aspects, it's very important that that use over 20 years is effectively without interruption, i.e. it just carries on. The year 2014 was quite important in that I believe it's at that stage that the landowner erected a couple of bits of barbed wire and a bit of bund work and some signs put up at either end. Now, although they didn't stop people using the route, and they've carried on using it since, it made it clear that the landowner wasn't very keen on people using the route and may not have felt that it's public right of way, and therefore we feel it's fine to discount any use or evidence since 2014 because the landowner clearly on the ground made that effort to actually dissuade people from using the path itself. Now, that leads us towards the end, really, of what has or hasn't happened. Firstly, and I think these areas need to be thought about, considered, and this isn't a scientific process. There's no exact right or wrong where it comes out of a computer and tells you whether it is or isn't. There is a certain feel about this, but it has to fit into certain criteria. So firstly, did people actually use that route as of right? It seems, looking at the evidence and the evidence pack, that they did think so. Was it interrupted? It seemed not to be interrupted until 2014, but it was interrupted at 2014. And looking back in time, had 20 years been established at that time? Well, for the majority of claims, that looks as though that is the case. And oddly, we're asking you to consider whether a highway come into being really in 2014 and not now. I think I've said it before at these things, you've got to go back in your time machine to a certain extent to actually consider matters. Anthony also mentioned the other side, shall we say, from the landowner's perspective. When the application was first received, Cemex, who owned the land, they formally wrote in and said there are no rights of access over the site, nor have ever been, and certainly no permissive rights of way. And they also mentioned the fact that they installed the fencing, but unfortunately that had been removed or vandalised. Further than that, when preliminary consultations were actually carried out, Cemex haven't actually responded to us in that respect. I'll just ask my colleague Piers when he starts to walk you through the route just to confirm that, so I'm not misleading you anyway. And I think we have gone to further efforts to engage with the company as well. So at the moment, there's not a great deal coming back in that context. So really, on the balance of the evidence available, it's considered from our point of view that this is a reasonable claim to have been made. But let me pass you over to Piers now, who's actually going to show you things on the ground.
Hello. Right. I'll show you a walkthrough of the path. If I can just, there we go. So the photographs start at point B, entering off the Ashby-Parva Road, and I will lead you along the pathway along the edge of the headland, out through some trees and back out onto the road again. So that's what it looks like from Ashby-Parva Road. The claimants state that they never actually went through the gate, but alongside it. The gate's quite rusty, it is padlocked, so that seems quite a reasonable assertion. There doesn't appear to be anything to stop people walking alongside the gate to the side there where you can see the trodden path. In the centre of the gate is a public notice which from the statements was erected in 2014 saying danger, stay out. There is, when the site was an operating quarry, the licence agreement, a licence that gave them permission to fill the quarry, did state that they had to make the site secure and prevent public access on the grounds of safety. But it would appear that actually that sign put up in 2014 isn't really appropriate in practical terms, because there appears to be no danger at all beyond the sign and hasn't been since the quarry was filled in. So going past the gateway, there's then this well-trodden path through trees, which continues through the trees past some earth and then wanders along the side of the headland. That's rather dark, but there is a trodden path along the hedge, which you can't see, going up to the brow of the hill. Then at the corner of the brow of the hill, the alleged path goes diagonally across the field, and at that point the visible trodden path isn't any visible anymore. Then you pick up on the right-hand side a bit several different sort of patches where people may have been walking, not overly clear. Then this is a reverse photo looking back into the field, and you can see that there's a well-trodden path coming off the field down through the trees once more. It goes through some rough ground. At the other end, this is the northern end, there is a wooden post and a bit of barbed wire, which doesn't actually go across the path, it's next to it. And there are signs that there probably was a sign in 2014 that was the same as the previous one that's been snapped off. Then we continue through the trees and out onto the road, and that's the exit out onto the road. One of the things that a landowner can do if they want to prevent people claiming a public right-of-way having a successful claim is to erect and maintain signs stating something along the lines of private land, no intention to dedicate a public right-of-way. There doesn't appear to have been, from the evidence forms or from any evidence provided by the landowners, that that was done. The signs that say danger, keep out, I think that's fairly clear, the intention that they wanted people to keep out, but it might not necessarily be read as to state that there isn't a public right-of-way there. And if they weren't maintained for the previous 20 years, then it's questionable whether they'd have the effect to negate any claim. If signs are erected and regularly damaged, then legislation allows landowners to submit plans and a statutory declaration with the local authority saying that they have no intention to dedicate any public rights of way. And the county council hasn't received that, a copy of or anything like that in the previous 20 years. So from the site visits and walkthrough, there isn't really any evidence to suggest that positive regular steps have been made to prevent people considering that they have a right-of-way along there. So that was a run-through of the route.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. I understand we've nothing from Bill Licorice, who's the division member for this. So it's open to members.
Yes, thank you, Chair. When I first became a county councillor in 1997, up until 2005, I represented Dunton Bassett. I have never walked this footpath, but I've always been aware that many people have and thought it was a public right-of-way. And what I've seen and heard this afternoon, I think it would be wrong of us to take away the right of people to walk on it, which is now established. And I'm quite happy to support the proposals.
Yeah, just a couple of questions, please, Chair. Appendix L is a letter sent to the Matthews giving them permission from I understand, the previous landowner. When the land was sold, did that permission cease? That's my first question. And the second one is, what has a landowner got to, I mean, you briefly touched on, Piers did, on what a landowner needs to do to keep people out. But if there's a hedge there that people are sort of pushing aside and walking in, that's surely trespass. If there's a bund there, if there's a gate, barbed wire, anything, even a ditch, does that not constitute a boundary people shouldn't go across?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'll deal with Mr. Charlesworth's first point. The permission at Appendix L would be personal between the then owner, Brandingthorpe Gravels, and Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, would only inure while Brandingthorpe Gravels were in existence.
With regard to barriers and fences, if there is genuinely a problem where a landowner has erected signs and made reasonable efforts to prevent people going on the land, and they find that there is a problem with damage to those fences or removal of the signs, then, as mentioned, it's not expected that they should have to keep on repairing and keep on replacing, and it's recognised in law that that would be onerous on them. So there is this specific piece of legislation under the Highways Act that enables them to fill in various pro formas, get them countersigned by a solicitor, and deposit them with the County Council under Section 31 of the Highways Act. And that will negate any future claim. So there are a variety of ways in which a landowner can try and prevent the deemed dedication of a public right-of-way on their land. I can't really comment on why a company wouldn't wish to do that if they were having a problem with unauthorised access as they would see it. Quite often, I think it happens, just as an observation of these particular issues, that people acquiesce to the use of the land. They don't give permission. They acquiesce to it. They let sleeping dogs lie. And then after a 20-year period, the law will, the conclusion will come to be that a right-of-way has come into being because they've not taken any of the steps available to them to prevent it happening.
So the answer to the second part of the question was physical barriers aren't enough to secure your land.
They can be the physical barriers. What the evidence in this particular case, the suggestion has been that the barriers have not extended very far beyond from the gate. The user evidence forms, the people who filled them in have said that the gate, they've recognised the gate's been locked and they've not been able to use that. They've simply walked round the side of it. And there doesn't appear to be, from the site visits, any suggestion of any Harris fencing or strong fencing, but merely just a post and wire. Forced entry on a regular basis would preclude, I think, a successful claim of the existence of a right-of-way. But if a post fall down, or if an unknown party removes a piece of wire, but then people continue to use it for a period of 20 years or more without action of the landowner to seal it off again, then, as I say, it might be concluded in law that there is a right-of-way. If somebody puts a substantial fence up and it's smashed down, and there's visible evidence of forced entry, then that would negate a claim, a successful claim.
Dan?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I support the recommendation. I think it's only just clarified it even more, the officer commenting that you put a sign up but don't maintain boundaries or seem to be trying to maintain boundaries. This has just gone on and people have walked for many years, and that I don't get the feeling that the landowner was really very concerned or perturbed about this, and I think by their action alone they've condoned what's happened, and we've ended up with this situation today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Oh, Mr. Bentley.
There we are. Thank you, Chair. I think that there's a bund at the end, and the fact that there is a gate, but the gate has been locked, and you quite clearly have to climb over the top of a bund isn't very welcoming if this is a public right-of-way. And the fact that there has been some signs, even if inappropriate signs, there are clearly signs saying keep off. And there is some barbed wire on the route. I'm sorry, I can't go with officer recommendation on this. I think there has been efforts to stop the public getting on there. And that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Wright.
Just for clarification on that last part on the bund and the gate, were they put up on 2014?
No, they weren't put up 2014. I think they've probably been there since the quarry was active.
Right.
Just to have a, when you say bund, as you can see, people can walk over them relatively easily. And at the northern end, we can't go that way. At the northern end, there doesn't appear to be a bund at that end.
What? Sean.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the officers for their diligence in gathering and weighing up the evidence, and I support their conclusions. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's been moved by David and seconded by Tony that permission is granted. I'd like to, all in favour? Any against? Mr. Bentley? Always going to be one. Right, thank you. That's dealt with that one then. Agenda item number 9 then is application to diversion order, proposed diversion order of public footpath at the Horse and Trumpet at Wigston, Oadby and Wigston Borough. Mr. Cross, do you want to start again on?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So, members, this is a slightly different species of right-of-way application. This is dealing with an existing path and requirement for it to be diverted at the Horse and Trumpet Public House at Wigston in the Oadby and Wigston Borough Council district. And it relates to an application that's been received on behalf of Everard's Brewery from Marron's Planning. And we have 2 speakers in connection with this matter, and, as we've heard, Mr. Bolter. The recommendation here, and I'm on page 105, is that the order being sought for diversion be granted, and the reason for the recommendation is that it's the officer's view, at any rate, that the statutory criteria in the Highways Act this time has been complied with. So, turning to the main body of the report, and again I'll just go through it briefly with regard to the legal issues. The first point that the report deals with at Part B are the planning issues and how this has arisen. And obviously, I would just say we are where we are now. What Oadby and Wigston Borough Council could or should have done is not a matter that you can consider, because we're dealing with the application as it stands now, which is an application to the County Council. And the legal considerations with regard to footpath diversions are contained in the Highways Act 1980, section 119, and that's set out on page 180 of your report, paragraph 17 onward. And the key issue, really, is section 18A. The County Council, and that's you as the decision makers in this instance, must be satisfied that it is expedient to divert the path in the interest of the public or the owner, lessee or occupier of the land crossed by the path. There's an issue that doesn't apply in this case if the path is being moved in terms of the termination point. And in terms of how you deal with this, little c explains that the diversion needs to be expedient. The proposed path or the revised path will not be substantially less convenient, and it's expedient to confirm the order having regard to the effect it will have on public enjoyment on the path as a whole. So, that's the legal background to this and what you have to consider in terms of whether you agree with the officer recommendation that the diversion should be made. I'll hand over to my colleagues now to take you through the evidence that's been considered.
Well, thank you, Anthony. I think it's... I will slightly go back on some of the past history on this, just to set the situation in context. It was in 2015 that it was reported to County Council that the brewery had actually arranged for a timber decking area. I mean, I think as you're all aware, there's been a large increase of such things next to public houses to allow for people to smoke or drink outside or vapour outside these days. And that was, in fact, constructed across the line of the public footpath. Now, as a result of that, the County Council actually did approach Everard's and asked for the obstruction, being the decking, to be removed. And to be fair to Everard's, they did then remove the timber decking. And at that stage, I think they had been depending on that particular decking also on presumed rights to carry out the works under permitted development. But following that, they went back in a more sensible way, shall we say, and applied for planning permission to Oadby and Wigston for a new decking proposal, which is a little bit more sophisticated than the one that was there before. This also was right next to the public house and obviously jutted out into the public footpath. Now, at that stage, it was hoped that whilst the matter was being considered under the Town and Country Planning Act, that the fact that the path needed to be moved would be picked up, and also that an order would be made to move the path at the same time under the Town and Country Planning Act to allow everything to go ahead. What actually happened was that the decking and other parts got done, and unfortunately the proposal for the path was put into the background and forgotten about. Having gone through all that, obviously the situation was again pointed out to the County Council, and on approach from us, Marams did agree to submit an application to have the path formally and permanently diverted, and this is the diversion you see in front of you. Of course, the decking itself has been through a public consultation and a public consideration matter, in that it was at that time considered through the planning system, and of course the right-of-way would have been a material consideration in those terms. And the other thing is that we as an authority, I think it would be in terms of a broad sensible approach. I mean, everything has to be approached on its merit. If the path is built upon and completely obstructed, well, we need to do something to rectify that situation pretty promptly. Where there is a very minor diversion in place and the party is prepared to come forward and resolve the situation, then that is why we are considering this diversion at the moment. Really, as Anthony's gone through, the criteria for looking at that is that the diversion should be to the benefit of the pub itself in applying for, and I think you'd agree it's of benefit to the pub to divert the path around it, and also in considering prior to confirming the order whether the path is substantially less convenient to the public as a consequence of the diversion. Now, the diversion itself is not a large diversion. If you look very carefully, and you've got good eyesight, better eyesight than me, you'll see that the path is being diverted. The old line is AB, and the proposed line is ABC. The final thing that was actually picked up in terms of, and I'll show a picture now of the front. So we stood on the footpath. The footpath would go straight towards those just on the left fascia of those terrace houses in front there. So just clips the boarding there. That area which faces out onto the main street there, that's obviously quite often used as a car park by people using the pub. And it was fairly apparent to officers that had a look at the case that there was a danger of the path being submerged by parked cars, especially in the evening. And that's why there is a specified condition set out to put some form of fencing in front, which is not security in any way. It's something that's a bit stronger than that, to actually stop cars actually going onto the actual path itself and allowing people to get through at all times. I think there you go, that one of these types, I don't think it'll be the timber one, it'll be something that's a little bit stronger than that to actually dissuade cars from doing that. You can actually see effectively the line of the footpath here, because the drain is probably linked to the highway in terms of that. So that's largely where we are at this stage in terms of promoting the order, having received an application from us. I should also say that we have had some objections to this. Now, I believe Mr. Bolter's going to speak up on this, so I feel a bit awkward in saying anything in terms of his concerns, because I'm sure he can say it a lot better than mine, but certainly logged at the time was the fact that there was an objection to the diversion, in part because this was considered to be an ancient highway which had some local interest, including to the Civic Society, and also that the path was effectively being diverted and should have been diverted prior to the development being carried out. I don't think anyone would deny that, but it's a case of we are where we are on this one. If the application proves unsuccessful, then the County Council will actually, in relation to that, will be faced with the question of whether we enforce the line and ask for this patio to disappear as well. And there is also an objection from the Civic Society, which I think is attached as Appendix D in your papers. And this again focuses on the existing path being historic right-of-way, and indeed alleged to be the ancient route of the former London Road, and it runs along the site of the original village green. And and also concerns around the parked cars situation as well, and the ability of people to effectively use the route. So that's really a run-through of the proposal, why it's come about, and the conclusion is that the legal tests have been met and that the authority should make an order diverting the path under the Highways Act. Thank you. Correct. I think what I was trying to say was AB is the current route, and I should have said ACB. Quite correct. Thank you.
Yes, we're with you in a minute, Bill. Yes, we have three speakers on this application this afternoon, Mr. Bolter, Mr. Lewis and Mr. Rood. Mr. Bolter, would you like to speak first? I don't know whether you want to remain there or go over there, whichever. You said you better sit there then. Come.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today as a resident of Oadby and Wixton, and I've been asked to offer a few views from the residents in my ward. It is not my county council ward. After I've said my little bit, I shall leave the meeting because I've already predetermined it, so I don't want to cause any problems with anybody else. As the officer said, this is the ancient road to London. If you look at the known document by Professor H.G. Hoskins, he clearly describes this in his book, Midland Peasant, as being the ancient road to London. The old road to London used to be Leicester, Wixton, Welford, Northampton, and that was the route it took. Down here, down what is now known as Little Hill, a bit further down the road to Gilliver Hill and over the hill. So the route is quite ancient, and that was the route until the A6 was built at Oadby, which was a dry route, and that took over the route to London. If you look at the car park now, you'll see there's in the tarmac where the old bollards have been snapped off. Originally there was no parking in front of the Horse and Trumpet. It was got little concrete bollards with a chain between them, and that cut the whole thing off. There was no car park there at all. The car park for the pub is at the back, not at the front. The owners have attempted to use that front area as a car park. Whether or not permission, I don't know, but that's not the point this afternoon. The whole crux of the matter is that when it came before the Oadby and Wixton Borough Council, it was said at the time by myself and others that the footpath should be diverted before the structure was built. At no time did the council at Oadby and Wixton consider the diversion of footpath at the same time as the erection. The county's highway authority is responsible for footpaths, not the borough council. We could do it in law, but we weren't asked to do it in law, and that's the difference with that one. At the moment, you look at the photograph there today, you'll see there's a seat blocking the footpath even today. That should not be there. some years ago, the pub did put some seating in front of the front door, but 99% of the time it was movable seating and it was kept away from the public highway, public right of way, the ancient road. It's put further away. If this goes ahead, we have got a conflict with cars, and owners have now said they're going to put some sort of fencing there. I wonder how long that will last, considering they're not concrete bollards down. I can't see this fence lasting a great longer. So if you did go down that route, I want a condition on that fence is maintained at all times. We mentioned then the thing about public enjoyment. Well, yes, public enjoyment is very important. It says in the report about there's no problem about people sitting on that decking area smoking and people walking by. I beg to differ. We go along a public footpath, and the last thing I'd want to do is people smoking, puffing their smoke at me as I'm walking by. You may say it's not a relevant point. I believe it is. It's for all to enjoy. A footpath is for all to enjoy, not just a few. The smoking area is also problematical. I also note in the report that it says there's been no antisocial behaviour. I've not got the latest report from the police, but I know in the past there has been antisocial behaviour in that area. As officers say, that's perhaps to do with the publican to control that rather than anybody else, but there has been problems there in the past. Some years ago maybe, but there's still potential there. This afternoon we've got Mr. Lucas, who is the well-known expert on the history of Wixton, and I was going to talk a great deal more about the history of this area, but I think you'll be bored by the time the end of the afternoon, because I think Mr. Lucas is going to go down that route. So I think I best to leave it there, to say that many residents in Oberby and Wixton are concerned about this, about the principle of building over a public right of way, and we do not agree that the diversion is a correct way to go around this. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Mr. Lucas. Oh, sorry, Bill. Are there any questions for Bill on the? Oh, Janet, you've caught me out.
Mr. Walter, you know when you said about the antisocial behaviour, do you know what sort of antisocial behaviour? Was it sort of noise, or was it damage, or can you define what sort of, please?
It was, I believe it was some sort of altercation between various people later on in the evening. All right.
Sean.
Yes, Bill, for clarification, you said that you thought this path should have been diverted at the time of the planning application. Is that right?
No, I'd have thought it would have been principal to have diverted the path before the plan application was considered.
So you'd have agreed with it at the time?
Agree with what?
Diversion, if it was part of the planning commission? Oh, right, okay.
Thank you, Bill. I think nobody else has indicated. Thank you. Mr. Lucas, are you here? Ah, great. Mr. Lucas, you have 5 minutes to speak. If you just press the button in front of you when you want to start speaking, and then switch it off when you've done. But you have 5 minutes anyway.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, this is a very hot, controversial subject in Wixton, and I've been blamed for most of the objections, and probably they're justifiably so. But as a boy, I was taken round the footpaths of Wixton and even told most of them closed on Easter Monday. to prove that the ownership of the land, it didn't affect the legality of them using as a footpath. But that's it. But if it is maintained that the suggestion, how will the maintenance of the rail be pursued? Will there be any follow-up on it? You know, I feel here that Everards are pulling the flanker. If you look at the structure of this extension, it's very substantial. So it would be a nice foundation, and I think the foundations, what I saw of them, were of a standard for a building. It could be a nice excuse ready to come along in the future with an extension of the building. That is the main objection that I have on this. It seems easy that it's a fait accompli, so therefore what can you do? But I still feel, because Everards have got a reputation, as most of the brewers have, of using any spare land on their premises for building. And here you've got a nice front, and if this darned footpath wasn't in the way, it would lead a lot of ease to extend. And I think that is what this committee must note and think of in the future, whichever way the decision goes. I fear for the future if the decision is to keep it up because of the future building. I shall get the blame for this. I got the blame for it when the first objection went in and the original structure was removed. But if that original structure is what they wanted, why was that taken away and a building foundation structure was put in? Beware.
Have you?
That's it.
You finished, Mr. Lucas? Yeah, you have. Would you just remain there if there's any questions for you? No, there's no questions, Mr. Lucas. You're free to go. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for coming in. Yeah. The next speaker we have is Mr. Rowe, who's here on behalf of the applicants. He's there. Mr. Rowe, you have the same 5 minutes. If you just press the button when you're ready to start speaking, and switch it off when you've finished, and if you just remain there just for any questions on what you've said this afternoon from the members of the panel. Ready when you are then, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, and to members of the board as well. That is extended to you also. My name is Matthew Rowe from Marrons Planning, and as previously raised, I am the agent for Everards Brewery on this matter. The relevant background to this footpath diversion has already been communicated more than adequately by the officers at hand. The decking area that's required the diverting of footpath Z17 was granted planning permission by Oby and Wigston Planning Committee in July 2017. It was the opinion of Planning Committee at the time that all concerns raised by objectors, namely the Wigston Civic Society, were overcome by the proposals, and that any alleged harm to the historic route of footpath Z17 was well below the harm threshold identified within the National Planning Policy Framework, which is a material consideration in every planning application. Concerns raised by the Civic Society regarding conflicts between pedestrians of the footpath and patrons of the public house were also considered in detail, and no conflict was to be found that was considered too substantial to overcome. These concerns have been raised again as part of this current application, and the proposed development was found to be wholly acceptable within the context of the development plan for the borough at the time, and it is of course the opinion of Everards Brewery and Marrons Planning that this remains the case. Conditions 2 and 3 of the relevant planning permission, which were pre-commencement planning conditions, have been discharged in full by Oadby and Wigston Borough Council. These conditions related to the materials to be used for the decking itself and for the demarcation of the footpath, which, subsequent to conversations with Leicestershire County Council, that demarcation has changed. Leicestershire County Council's Public Rights of Way Department were a statutory consultee as part of the original planning application and had no objection to the diversion proposed under that planning application. Since the admittedly very premature erection of the decking area, and as part of this current application under the Highways Act, your council's public rights of way officer has been incredibly helpful in advising on the subsequent footpath diversion application and the options available to Everard's Brewery to regularise the diversion itself. This advice has included the final routing, which is presented to you here, and the technical specifications for footpath Z17 that will ensure that the minimum technical standards are complied to at all times. As detailed at paragraph 28 of this application's committee report, no objections have been received from any statutory undertakers, the Borough Council, and perhaps most importantly, any footpath user group. The concerns raised by Councillor Bill Bolter and the Civic Society are also addressed from paragraph 30 onwards, and whilst noted and of course fully appreciated, Everard's Brewery obviously side with the recommendations of the case officer and fully endorse the commentary provided by the officers in this regard. Everard's Brewery, as discussed, have committed in writing to the provision of knee-high fencing or something of a similar ilk that will clearly define this proposed route, and it will ensure that the minimum specified width of 2.5 metres is complied with at all times by a process of clear demarcation. This will allow the footpath to remain accessible at all times and will allow for users to enjoy the footpath unimpeded without cars extending into the area of the footpath, which, as noted, has occurred in the past and could continue to do so if the knee-high fencing itself was not erected. This diversion and the erection of the fencing will regularise any conflict between pedestrians and motor vehicles and patrons using the public house, and it will improve the public's enjoyment of the footpath considerably in accordance with the legal tests set out at section 119 of the Highways Act. The proposed diversion is evidently not substantially less convenient to the public, and the diversion is clearly in the interests of Everard's Brewery as the landowner and public house. As detailed at page 43, section Conclusions of the accompanying committee report, the proposed diversion meets and is respectfully considered it to exceed the requirements of the legal test which is outlined at section 119 of the Highways Act 1980, and it is respectfully requested that the order is made under the provisions of the Act. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. Any questions from Mr. Rowe? No, you're free to go then, Mr. Rowe. Michael Charlesworth, you're about the nearest Michael, I think, to. You are mentioned in dispatches, so I'll come to you first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, where to begin? This is a dog's dinner, to put it bluntly. Yes, I know we're dealing with what's in front of us today, but it does go back, as it's been mentioned, to 2015, when Highways became aware of this, as did the enforcement officer at Oban and Wigston, of a decking, not brick like this, but a completely wooden decking was being constructed, and they were told to remove it, and they did do that. They abided by the rules and got rid of the decking, and were invited to put in a formal application to Oban and Wigston Borough Council, which they did, and I've got the application in front of me, which came in spring of 2017 and was deliberated on, I think it was 17th of July. I wasn't on the planning committee at Oban and Wigston, but it was approved. But in the application by the applicant, it clearly says they've been in contact with the County Council under Mr. Piers Linley about this, because common sense would tell you these two things are done together. I know Mr. Bolter says it should have been done beforehand. I disagree on that. These should have gone together. County Council had enough notification of the application for this decking, and they should have been doing this, what we're doing today, exactly 2 years ago. Doing the footpath diversion and that application should be done at the same time. Why we're doing it 2 years later, there's no satisfactory answer. Backburn has been mentioned. I think lessons learned are that councils, district and county talk to each other in a better way, because this should have been done together. I can't emphasise that enough. It's been a real bugbear for me over the past few years. People have got strong opinions on it. I take a fairly neutral approach on this. It's up now. Personally, I think it would be unreasonable to ask them to take all that down again. I can see no justification for that whatsoever. In a perverse sort of way, as the gentleman from Marans has just said, with protection, some sort of barrier, low fencing in front of this, it will actually define the right of way in a better way. People will then see it is a right of way and probably will appreciate it more. People do use that footpath because it takes them from their Bullhead Street to Newton Lane and shortens journeys. So, like I say, in that perverse sort of way, it will show there is a footpath. It'll protect people. I take the point, it's a very ancient route, and I've seen the documentation from 1952 being sent to the County Council by Urban District Council. Huge amount of history to it. I'm not going to move or second it, but I think the condition, as Marans has said, I mean, it must probably be a condition that the railings do go up. You have to protect the public who use that footpath. But I see no value. It was mentioned by one of the speakers that should we refuse this diversion, the question then is, do we go down the route of saying get rid of that structure? Well, I think in refusing the diversion, we don't get the rail, and actually if there was an appeal, that thing would still be there. I think we are where we are. I'm going to be pragmatic, but I'm not going to oppose this. I just think it's very disappointing. It wasn't all done at the same time. Somebody somewhere was not getting things done.
Thank you, Michael. Tony.
Thank you, Chairman. As the previous application, I believe that the officers have been extremely diligent in their decision-making process. And to that end, Chairman, I move the recommendation.
I'll second that, Chair.
David, did you indicate something?
I indicated,
Whoa. I'm being inundated. David, you go next then.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't live in Wixton, but I went to school in Wixton and we shop in Wixton. I do know the area. I've never even been in the pub, but I drive by it on a regular basis. And whatever the situation is, as Mr. Charlton has said, we are where we are. And I've got to say that this blends in with what is there. What happened centuries ago, or whatever it was, when it was the road to London, was so. It's part of the history of Wixton. But this looks okay to me, and I think it blends in, and I will vote for the application.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Ian, you was next, I think. I got it.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm actually against having the knee-height barrier put in front of it for the simple reason, if somebody comes out of this pub at night, probably poorly lit, what's going to happen if somebody walks into it? It's going to be the cause of many an accident. If there's going to be a barrier, it would have to be much higher than knee height. If that's knee height, I think it's going to be an absolute nightmare. So I'd like to add to the proposer, if he's willing to accept the amendment, that it's actually deleted. If it's not deleted, it should be made higher. Thank you, Chair.
Janice.
First of all, can the officers tell me regarding the car park at the back, how many, does it hold many cars? Is there plenty to park round the back?
The guesstimate I've been given is about 20 vehicles.
About 20 vehicles, thank you. And are there any disabled ones at the front on the right-hand side? I thought I spotted looking at the picture from the front. Is there some disabled car parking at the front?
Okay, I'm going to go for 2 on this one. And I looked to my right earlier, and I think somebody was indicating that it may be more than 20 cars can get into the rear.
Thank you, Chairman. It's only to try and visualise the safety aspects of it. I've got no problem with it. I think, it does blend in with the pub. My other concerns is, like Mr. Bentley said, the knee-high barriers. I think they should be much higher and strong, because if cars are allowed to come up here, they're still allowed to come onto this car park, are they? I know it's not an official car park, but are the cars allowed to park on that front? Yeah. So again, for safety reasons, I feel that there should be much higher and much stronger, more or less similar to not a crash barrier, but the strong metal ones that come high enough up to protect the walkers, ramblers, whatever. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Mrs. Wright.
Taking a pragmatic approach to this, I agree with what the speakers, particularly Mr. Charlesworth, has said. Just going on about the fence, I'd like to pick up on what Mr. Bolter actually said, who obviously knows the area, and put something in as a condition about maintenance on the fence if the condition is put through.
Dan.
Chairman, we've all spoke now.
Yeah.
I picked up on Mr. Charlesworth's comments, and when you look at it, I think a railing would be most fitting, really, because it would delineate exactly what it is, and maybe there could be a little badge somewhere to say this was an ancient right of way or whatever, and make something of it, because otherwise we're going to end up with something that's not quite appropriate. And I think we ought to say this is a great opportunity to sort of say this is where we are, this would be great, this protects that walkage through, and it could have something, as I say, as a plaque to say this was the ancient route. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, you want to talk about?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I listening to the comments, and particularly what Bill said earlier about the fence. I did move the recommendation, including the knee rail, but listening to colleagues then, as the mover, I accept a stronger structure to be in place.
And higher as well.
And maintain, yes. If that can be added added in.
Does Ed need to comment any more on that, or you, Mr. Cross?
It sounds like a legal matter to me.
As ever. Well, members, I've really got nothing to add. The report indicates that although this is a quasi-highways rights-of-way matter, straining slightly into planning, the report indicates conditions can be imposed, and obviously the mood of the committee is to do more with regard to safeguarding. But can't see any objection to what you're proposing. Obviously, that would be an issue in terms of if Everard's felt unable to comply with it, there might be issues with regard to enforcement. But I'm looking really to Mr. Rowe, to be quite frank, to see whether, on behalf of his clients, he would raise any objection. Okay. So there, we'll have that on the record. So I think that would be fine, Chairman.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dan.
Sorry, Chairman. Just a point of order for clarification. Are we talking of a 4-foot railing? I just visualised somebody said something really robust earlier on, and it'd look as though it's like imprisoned. You know, something probably 4 foot, and it was made look nice. You know, it's something to celebrate, not something that's going to look fierce and horrible. Thank you.
Dennis.
On the post, there are a picture of some wooden ones, but if they were metal ones, have you got the picture? Just yeah. If they were sort of strong like that, but still look.
They're on the screen now, Janet.
Oh, sorry, yeah. These, looking at the picture left-hand side, Chairman, they look more robust and stronger. But if the wood, I would say probably if they could be put metal, would that be stronger? That's just a thought by looking at the pictures. Thank you, Chairman.
Michael.
I think whatever's most appropriate between the applicant and highways officers that fits in with the area. It needs to blend in, however substantial or not it is, it needs to blend in. It doesn't need to be a carbuncle on the area. And perhaps Marons or the applicant could think about the blue plaque as well, or whatever, green, red, whatever.
Yes, of course you are. Tony.
Yeah, Chairman, I agree with what Michael's just said, and I'm happy for the applicant to propose a barrier of some description, providing it fits in and it's aesthetically pleasing. And I'm robust, yes, and I'm happy for officers to make that decision without coming back.
Is the seconder in agreement with that? Ian, are you in agreement with that, Ian?
Yes, Chair, I am, but we keep missing the point specifically about the height. The height should be well above knee height, because I think that's just going to create problems. So if the proposer could just come back on the height, just... Well, no, it needs to be a height so that it won't present... Well, if it's just posts, that's fine. Yeah. No, if it's just posts, that's fine. Yeah, thank you.
Are we happy with posts? Are you happy with the seconding of it then, Ian? Yeah. We'll take a vote on it then in that case. All in favour? Yeah, that looks to be about unanimous. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ed, and your partner. Are you all right? Thank you very much. Moving on, it's item number 10. That's a planning application for the erection of a new building, housing, brick drying, manufacturing equipment in Ibstock Brick at Ellistown. Nick, would you present this report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is an application to replace an existing drying building with a new building. And on the aerial photograph, you can see there on the screen, just to set in context where we are. So with the arrow, we've shown where the proposed new building will go within the brickworks. We've also got in the surrounding area very much an industrial setting. We've got the Barden Hill employment area recently constructed to the northeast. To the north, we've got the Amazon warehouse. The village of Ellistown is to the northwest. And then to the south, we've got the solar farm, the Palex employment unit. And to the east, which looks rural, that's got planning permission for employment as well. So very much within an industrial setting and part of the historic quarry. So this is just a little bit closer. So this is the brickworks. A couple of things to point out on this slide is the existing dryer building is where I've indicating on the screen at the moment, and that will be demolished to allow for this proposal. And the new building, the dryer building, will be located within the area to the north that I've highlighted there. So that area at the moment is used ad hocly, but mainly partly for the storage of bricks. And the intention is that brick storage will be moved over to the south, where the current dryer building is located. A couple of other things to point out: the railway line to the east of the site, and then to the south, what we have is the nearest residential properties to the south of Victoria Road, about 100 metres away from the existing dryer building. And there's landscaping and quite an extensive bund that separates the site from Victoria Road, and you actually can't see the site at all from the road. So in terms of where the new dryer building will be located, it will be very much screened within the site. So this is a little bit closer. So this is the building which I pointed out a moment ago that will be demolished, and the new building will be located just to the north. In terms of footprint, the new building will be almost twice the size as the existing, and that's because the technology has moved on. It would allow additional capacity for drying bricks, but also allow the operations to operate much more efficiently, for vehicles to be manoeuvred in and out of the building, and for the bricks to be transferred easily and much more efficiently. It's a far more energy efficient building, And in terms of the cost and impact on the environment, it will be very much a more advanced, latest technology proposal. Now, the existing building's been there about 30 years. There are structural problems with it, and it is affecting detrimentally the efficiency of the brickworks. These are just a few elevations. So the new building will be 14 metres high, with a 2.5 additional height. You can see on the plan where the chimney stacks will be located. The overall height is very much in keeping with the existing brickworks. It doesn't project uncomfortably above the height of the existing buildings. And just a couple of photographs. So this is the existing dryer with the bricks currently stored alongside. Sorry, the photos aren't brilliant because it's hard to get good photographs. But that existing building is located just on the left-hand side of this particular image, and the new brick dryer building will be located in the foreground of this photograph. Okay, so in terms of the impacts and the merits of the proposal, you'll see from the report that we've had no objections from any of the consultees, any local residents, parish or district council. It's in a countryside location, but very much enclosed and enclosed as part of the existing brickworks. The proposal will bring the drying facility up to date, retain the 59 jobs. There are no additional jobs proposed, but it will retain those existing jobs certainly in the medium to long term, which is certainly positive and adds in favour of the proposal. It enables the brickworks to continue. It's proposing a permanent facility, not a temporary use, and that is in accordance with the existing buildings on the site, which are granted permanent planning permission. And we heard a couple of committees ago, I think it was in relation to Desford Brickworks, where a similar proposal was proposed, which is a permanent permission. There are no technical issues in terms of granting planning permission. As I've said, the noise issues are probably less in terms of local residents than what's operating at the moment. It's actually going to be 3 decibels lower in terms of volume, very much contained visually, and we're content that it's in keeping with what's there. We've got a condition recommended for construction hours, normal daytime hours, 7 a.m. till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, and then Saturday mornings. And on that basis, we're satisfied that it's in accordance with policy and recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Dan, it's your division. Would you like to speak?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think this is a very welcomed move for the company. I like the idea of the new technology. I like that it's going to be quieter and not so loud as its predecessor. Nobody's objected to me, whether district or parish. No individuals approached me and said they don't want this. So I think this is a nice, perhaps, Chairman, the smallest report this afternoon. Perhaps the easiest one to deal with in some ways, because really it isn't offensive to anybody. And it's going to help with the industry to continue and provide jobs. So I will want to move this, Mr. Chairman. And I'd just about finished, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Have you done? Oh, it's been seconded by Janice. Did you want to speak, Janice?
No, I wanted to.
Tony, you're going to.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. No, I'm happy to 5th, 6th and 7th it, because it's, as Dan quite rightly said, it's a good thing for North West Leicestershire and a major investment, Chairman, so I'm happy to support.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Mr. Bolter.
Just a point, Chair. I noticed it's higher than the existing building. How will it be seen from the houses, or will it still not be seen from the houses?
No, I don't think you'd see it at all. The landscape's very dense and high in that location, and there's quite a high earth bund, so I don't think you'd see it at all.
It's been moved and seconded then that we go ahead with the proposal. All in favour? That looks to you be unanimous, you? Okay, thank you. Item number 11 is delegated decisions. The which is on page 143, 44, 45. These are really receiving note things, but if there are any comments, say so. To vote, then I'll propose that we receive and note them. All in favour? Thank you. Item 12 is the same, similar thing really, but this is tree preservation orders. All in favour? It's unanimous again then, Ewan. Right. Item 13 then is any other items the Chairman has decided to take as urgent. We haven't any of those, and 14 is Chairman's announcements. Well, thank you very much for coming. And we'll close the meeting. Thank you.